I'm Mims Henstorf, and today I'm interviewing Joan Hamilton. Joanne, what kind of work did your parents do to earn their money? And did they, during the Depression, can you remember if they had to take on additional jobs?
No, we lived on a farm in Fremont County, and that was all my dad did. We had 80 acres, and at that time most people had 80. I can remember a few people having 40 yet, and that didn't last too long. We never did worry about things to eat because we always had plenty. My folks butchered, and we always had a big garden, and my mother just canned everything. I remember one of my favorite things that she canned was grape juice. I always liked the grape juice. And
did she can meats?
She canned beef. We belonged to what's known as a beef club, and Ben Darby from Northborough was the butcher, and they had a little house down on Boyd Hamilton's farm. And if you belonged to the beef club, you belonged on a full share or half share. If you were a full share, you would put in a whole beef, whole steer, when it was your week to furnish. If you had a half share, you and somebody else went in partners. And then whoever put the beef in that week got the extras, like the liver and the heart and the tongue and those kinds of things. He always got the skin, I think, for doing it. And then the person that put the beef in that week would go down and get tubs. And literally, my mother would set a dish pan out that was about so. And they would fill that dish pan with fresh meat. And they'd go around to all the farmers that were in this beef club and leave their portion of meat each week. And then my mother did a lot of canning of that. We had a lot of liver for breakfast when it was our turn. She didn't can the liver, so we ate a lot of liver when we had the liver. And then the butcher block that he used, and this was many, many years later, but the last time he butchered at my parents' home, and he would take this huge butcher block to the basement. I don't know how he ever got it back out, but that time he told my dad, he said, "I'm going to leave it." And it's the butcher block that he used when he was doing this butchering. And I have it and have given it to my kids with the understanding that when they're through with it and don't want it any longer, it won't be destroyed. It'll be brought back to the Shenandoah Museum with the story.
Did you folks have hogs and chickens?
Yeah, we had always had farm animals. They milked a lot of times. They milked up to 13 or 14 cows, and that's where they got their money, because they'd take their eggs and milk or cream to town on Saturday night. And my husband always said that was egg and daughter day when I was a little older. But that was where they got their money for their groceries and gasoline for their car and that kind of thing. Mother wanted a set of dishes, I remember, when I was little, and McClellan's had some in, and she would like pay $0.25 for a plate, and maybe she had $2 she could spend that week, so she could get 2, and she ended up with a set of 8, and I have that set of dishes now too. It was fun growing up on a farm, but it was kind of lonesome. I didn't have anybody to play with, and I have some pictures when I was, I suppose, 4. I would dress my cats up in my doll clothes, and I had a doll buggy, and push them around. I'm sure they loved that, but they didn't seem to mind too much. We had a fenced-in yard, because, well, not everyone did, but a lot of farmers would have a fenced-in yard because they wanted to keep the chickens out of the yard, to keep the yard nice. And we had no water, no electricity, and we lived on a dirt road. And it was a dirt road, I think, until I was about 7th or 8th grade. And we did get electricity after the 30s. We didn't have any electricity during the 30s or any water. And what was fondly known as 4 rooms and a path. And we had a pump, and we had good water. Not everybody had real good water. But we did have good water. And on wash days, we had a separate building. It was called the wash house. And Mother had a wood-burning stove in there, and she would fill the wash boiler, and I have her copper wash boiler, and fill that wash boiler with water, and then she'd boil the white clothes. And we had what was known as a Delco plant. Down in the basement of the house, we had it was an engine, and then up on shelves were lots of batteries. I could just remember seeing a row of batteries up there. And we run that Delco plant, and then you could run some electricity off of that. And so we had some lights in the house. But we had to be real careful. We used our lamp more than we did the electricity, because then that took kerosene, and that cost money, and we didn't have much money. So we used our lamp more than we used the electricity, but we did use it a little bit. And she had a wringer washing machine out in the wash house. And whoever had built the wash house or put it there had put a drain in the floor. And so she had a hose. She could unhook the hose from the washer, and she could drain it, and it went out into the chicken yard. And then the wash tubs, you had a wringer, and the clothes went through the wringer into wash tub 1, and then when you got that done, you swung the wringer around and took them from wash tub 1 to wash tub 2. And so they were rinsed. And like I said, we kept a lot of things. I kept those until my granddaughter asked for them, so she now has the wash tub. So we've got a lot of memorabilia scattered around.
So you had chickens and used the eggs when you went to town. Did you butcher the chickens as well and can that meat?
My mother never canned chicken. She didn't like canned chicken. My grandmother did, but my mother never did. If we wanted a chicken, she would take one that wasn't laying and go butcher it, and if it was an old hen, she'd roast it. But she'd buy, 100 or more, I don't remember for sure, little chicks, and then put them in this wash house, and she had a heat light that she would put on them, and while they were in that wash house until they were old enough to survive outside. And one time, I was about 4, and I do remember doing this. She had bridge club, and I was outside the yard, and all these little chicks, fuzzy chickens, were running around, and I was catching them and playing with them, and I got to tossing them up in the air, watching their flutter their wing and fly. Well, of course, they couldn't fly. And I think I killed a few before my mother came out and discovered what I was doing. I don't remember the punishment, but I remember watching the little chickens flutter. And like I said, I was about 4 when that happened. And to feed the chickens, and we bought our feed in town, and feed sack clothes, the figured and flowered and all different kinds of designs of feed sacks were available. And so when you'd go to buy your feed for your chickens, you'd try to get enough feed sacks of the same design or the same color or this whatever to make something. And the fellow in Farragut was real good. If he didn't have enough sacks for you, the next time you went in, he probably had one kind of saved back for you of the same design, so you could have that. And I don't have any of my feed sack clothes, but I have some aprons, and I do have doll clothes that my mother made for me when I was 5, 6 years old, and they were made out of feed sacks, and I've still got those. So, and then
and you mentioned having dolls to play with, and you dress up your cats. So did you have other play toys?
Yeah, I never really lacked for anything. Of course, the things that were available then had never been heard of now. We did have a Monopoly set, and then my dad had a carom board. Do you know what a carom board is?
No.
Do you know what a carom board is? Well, it's a board to be about the size of the smaller card tables, and it has, I think there's one here, and it had 4 pockets, and it had a checkerboard. You could play checkers on it, and we had these round rings you put in the middle, and then you'd take your finger and snap, and you had a shooter, and then you tried to get them in the pockets, and the green ones counted 10 points, and the red ones counted 5, and if the black one was 25 points. And then my dad and I played that a lot. We played a lot of card games when I was growing up, and I had a few dolls. My mother made the clothes for them. I had a mosaic set, which was pretty little bead-like things, a little round, and then it was just a cardboard. It had holes in it, and then you could put these little colored beads in these holes to make a design. And I don't have that anymore, but that was one of my favorite things to do. Another one was color. I'd draw around some paper dolls. I had a lot of paper dolls when I was little, and I would draw around some of the clothes and then color and make my own clothes and cut those out. The Sears and Roebuck catalog sometimes would have dresses that I could cut out that would fit my dolls. Sometimes I would cut dolls out of Sears and Roebuck catalog and then make clothes for those. When I was old enough to start reading, which was probably first, second grade, I finished second grade, but it was still in the 30s. And we would go to the library, and people in Fremont County had to buy a library card to the Shenandoah Library. And I think it cost $1.50 for like 6 months, something like that. It wasn't very expensive. But I remember times that we didn't have the money to get a library card, so I couldn't get a library book. And
you talked about your mom having bridge club or having ladies over for cards. Do you remember, did she feed them and what she did that day when she knew the bridge club was coming?
that's what these dishes were for. The other ladies in the bridge club she thought had nice dishes, and this particular pattern that she accumulated from McClellan's with her egg money was called the waffle pattern. It's glass. I have those. And then she would fix usually a salad or sometimes a sandwich and a salad, and they always had something to eat. And they always played in the afternoon. There were 8 of them, and many of them were still around, I think, for 50 years that they played bridge together. And they were all neighborhood ladies because you didn't go very far. We had an old Model A car when I was a kid, and it served several purposes. It took us where we needed to go. It was pretty good in the mud if we couldn't get out and it couldn't wait for it to dry up. Why, it worked pretty good in the mud. My dad had chains for it, and if he wanted to take a pig or a calf or something to market, he'd just take the back seat out of it and put some gunny sacks down and some newspapers and put the calf or the hog in the back of the Model A, and he'd bring it up to Shan to the auction. And that was fairly common. We didn't have a pickup, and if you had somebody come with one, you had to pay them. And one time they vowed that they would never take any money out of my piggy bank, but they needed kerosene. They had no fuel, and they had to take money out of my bank to pay for their kerosene. That was all the money in the house. So we didn't have any money, but we weren't really poor, and I think that was because we could eat, and we always had, Mother was a good seamstress, and we always had nice clothes. So
Did the husbands bring the ladies to play bridge, or did they drive themselves?
it was both. Some of them drove. Sometimes the ones that didn't drive, the ones that did drive would pick them up and take them. And see, they all lived within like 2 miles probably of each other out there. I remember, I don't know, I suppose I was 5 or so at the time. We had, of course, a separate garage, and it had sliding doors on it, on a track that slid. And it also had a pass door. And my mother would go in the pass door and get in the car and back out. And the door would be coming down over the back and the windshield of the car. Well, my dad was a little unhappy about that because it often would take it off the track when she would do that. But she'd go in the door and back out.
What about school? Went to
We
a
lived
country school?
2 miles, went to country school for 7 years. Started, I think, in 38. And if it was really muddy and the roads were kind of bad, my dad would hook up the horse to the buggy, and I went to school in the buggy. And they'd pick me up. If it was nice, I had a pony. I would ride my pony. It was a Shetland pony. And if you've had any experience with Shetland ponies, you know what they're like. They can be kind of mean and ornery. Well, this one didn't like to cross bridges. And of course, I couldn't make her cross bridges. And I remember one time that one just a little ways from us, and my dad said, well, don't let her go, because she would see him coming and she would let go. So I had to hang on to her that day, and he come down with a little board, gave her a little swat. And she didn't have much trouble crossing the bridges after that. But another thing, when I was riding her, when I was kind of little, she would shy around a culvert and leave me right in the middle. But she'd go over and eat grass until I'd get up and come back and get on her. Sometimes she'd nip at me. She didn't want me to get back on her. But one time my mother had to come to school because I couldn't catch her to get on her. She wouldn't let me on. But Mother came over and got her. So they had to call. We had the old-fashioned telephone that hung on the wall, and we had a party line. And every time the phone rang, it rang on at all the houses. So when it rang, they knew whose it was. And one in particular, you could always hear this when the phone went up. She had to listen to all the phone conversations. So now those are a premium if you can find them.
Did you have your own slate when you went to school, or was that provided at school? Do you remember? Or did you have...
No, we didn't have slates. Well, I think we had them, but we didn't really
notebooks?
use them that much for lessons. We did have the Big Chief tablets,
Okay.
and learned with phonics. And the teacher would have cards that she'd, flash cards, and you were supposed to sound the letter when she gave you those cards. She also had them for addition. And she had the big maps that came down for geography and stuff, but that was a little bit later. We didn't do that when I was that little. And we took our lunches, and we had a pail of water, and you had your own cup. And you just dipped your cup in the pail of water and got a drink. And they had, of course, two outhouses out back, one for the boys and one for the girls. And if you wanted to go outside during class, you raised your hand with one finger or two. And she'd look at you and let you go out and go to the bathroom.
You talked about your mom made clothes for you and out of the sacks, feed sacks. What about shoes or jackets and that kind of thing? Were they store-bought?
I really remember one snowsuit in particular, and it was kind of a deep maroon, and was wool. And I can imagine what that was like if it got wet. But, and then we wore the long stockings, and I hated those, and the garter belt. And for school, they were supposedly flesh color, and for Sunday, they were white that we wore. Shoes we bought, and most of them we bought here in Shenandoah at Brown's. And at that time, I was fascinated by the x-ray machine, which the museum has one. And I could look down through that, and my mother on one side and the clerk on the other side, and I could show you the bones of your feet and where the shoes were and how well they fit you. But my shoes were, I got at least one new pair of shoes a year, and usually one good pair and one school pair. So
And you had separate clothes for church that you
Yes.
kept aside just for
And we
church.
dressed up for church. We always had nice, nice clothes, at least clothes that we didn't wear anyplace else for church. And my dad would wear a suit for church, but if he was coming to town, he would dress up by putting on a clean shirt, a necktie, and a pair of bib overalls. And that was his dressed up attire to come to town, because he always kept one pair of bib overalls, a fairly new pair. And then when that one began to get kind of worn, then he'd use it for every day, and he'd get another new pair. That would be his good pair of overalls.
What about helping in the kitchen? Did your mother teach you to cook then, or?
Some, but I tried to avoid it. I'd much rather go outdoors and be with my dad. I didn't like to be in the house. She did teach me to iron, and we had the irons that you heated on the stove, and then you hoped they weren't too hot and they didn't scorch. And then by the time they got cool and the wrinkles weren't coming out, then it was time to go back and put it back on, or else get another one, because she probably had more than one. And I started ironing by ironing handkerchiefs, and we ironed virtually everything, and well, everything was needed to be ironed, but you would sprinkle your clothes, and my mother did have a pop bottle and had a sprinkler in the pop bottle, and you'd sprinkle the clothes, and then you roll them, and if you had room in the refrigerator, which she didn't, she put them out on the porch or someplace, and then by the next day that moisture had pretty well soaked through the clothes, and then you ironed them the next day. And wash day, we hung them on the line. She washed the white things, and then the light colored things, and then the darker colored things, and the poor overalls got washed last, and rugs. And then the water that was, if you took water out they didn't drain out, that's what you went and scrubbed the outhouse with the leftover water from the laundry.
You mentioned a refrigerator. Did you have an iceman that came?
Yes. I always liked when he came, because sometimes he'd give me a little chip of ice, and he had a big leather cloak, black, and he'd throw that block of ice up over his back, and then bring it in and put it in the ice box. And we had to be real careful about opening that ice box, because every time you opened it, you let cold air out, which made the ice melt faster. And he bring anywhere from 50 to 100 pounds. And then if we were having haymen or something like that, why they always had to have a lot, because they'd chip out, I suppose 5 pounds or so of ice, and put it in a great big stone jar and put their iced tea in that for the farmers when they were doing hay or something like that.
Why don't you tell us about the heydays when they would come, and would they all work together on the farm, and then the wives came and fed them?
They'd move from farm to farm. They they brought food, some did too, and they always had, nearly always had fried chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy, and whatever vegetables were in the garden at the time, and pies for dessert. And the men always came in and they washed up out at the pump. They had soap and water out there, and the water was cool, and then they'd sit in the yard for a while till it was time to come in and eat, and then they went back out and worked. And I had a pony, that little Shetland pony, and they put a saddle on her, and the jugs of water, the brown jugs of water, and I would haul those and hook it over the saddle horn and take those out to the haymen when they were out in the field. So.
You were probably a little bit young to remember about the blizzards of '36, but what can you remember about the snowstorms and the bad storms?
I remember a lot of snow. One year, the snowsuit that I told you about, this wool one, a mile north of where we lived, the snowplow had gone through, and it had hit, I think I was about second grade, and my dad was taking me to school in that car, and the snow was way above the car where that snowplow had, and he had me stand up on that snowbank, and he took my picture. And that we always had a lot. We had a hill not too far from the house, and it seemed like every winter we had a lot of snow and could sleigh ride. But they did away with the hedges along the roads. They raised the roads when they went in and put gravel and stuff. They would grade them up, and didn't have near the snow that stayed, so we could sleigh ride and stuff on it. I did have a sled, and we did a lot of sleigh riding on that hill.
You talked about going to town with your eggs to sell. Did you sell vegetables as well?
No, we did not. We just had the eggs and the cream, and then one year we milked a lot of cows, 20 or 25, and then they would come and pick up the cream that year. And the egg cartons or crates that they put them in would hold 12 dozen. They were square, and you put 12 dozen eggs in there. And if you had a lot of hens, then you got a cardboard double one, which would hold 24 dozen. And then you took that. On the crates, you always had your name written on them, usually painted in some way on them, because when you'd take them to town, why they'd take the eggs and count how many you had, and then they would pay you for them. And but they didn't have your egg crate emptied yet. So that's when Mother would go shopping, and we'd come back and you picked your crate out of the ones that were there, so you need to have your name on your egg crate, so you got the right one back. And about their produce, always brought it to Stewart's Produce here in town. And
So then, if you, can you remember if, when you brought your eggs, then as the Depression got worse, do you remember the town people then not buying as many, or you'd have eggs to bring back home?
No, the only thing, then this I heard, I know there was a time that my dad would dump the cream into the trough for the hogs because it wasn't bringing enough money. And that was during that time, and I remember him walking down there with the milk, but I guess at that time I didn't really know the reason. But that was it, so we always had hogs. But no, we didn't sell anything else. If we had extra, we gave it away. They'd give it to people that didn't have it or friends in town. And but Mother actually canned most everything that she could. And other than, well, and it was into the 40s. This is before they got lockers. But like strawberries and those kinds of things were just seasonal because we didn't have any way to, she wouldn't can that kind of stuff. She'd make strawberry preserves, do it that way. But to actually be able to can them, she didn't ever can that kind of stuff. Peaches she did. So.
What about Christmases? What do you remember about Christmases? How did you celebrate?
Well, we had pine trees, and my dad would always go saw off a limb, and he'd look for one that looked pretty good, but they were kind of flat on one side. And we always had decorations. I made the chains, the construction paper beside the other made chains as part of the decoration. And we had a few things that had been bought, a few balls, and they had lights. We did string popcorn some, but not very much. We had popcorn, but we didn't use it a lot for Christmas decorations. And then we often went to my grandmother's for Christmas, and I remember being really worried that Santa Claus wouldn't find me over there. And this was when I was, I suppose, 6, 7, old enough to get concerned about that. And they assured me that he would. And I got a set of tin dishes at my grandmother's that year. And it was right by the window, right beside the upstairs window, like Santa Claus just reached in the window and put the dishes on the floor. And when we come home that Christmas, I had a panda bear under the tree. We always had a few Christmas presents. Mother made a lot of fudge and that kind of thing that one of my favorite things was fudge and apples for a Sunday night treat. We did that a lot on Sunday night. And my dad liked oranges, and we would come up here to Henry Field, and you could buy, I think they were 50-pound sacks, so they were in a mesh bag, and he would buy a bag of those. And we had a cool place that we would put those, and we'd eat on them for quite a while. And he liked to cut them in half, and then if you're real careful, you could flip them inside out and eat a half at a time. So we did that a lot. We had a coal-burning stove, and wood burning in the kitchen, and coal burning in the living room. And you wake up in the morning, and of course all your fires had gone out, and the wash basin would have ice in it. So they had to get the house warmed up every morning. And before I would go to bed, my dad would hold a blanket behind the stove, and then he'd hurry in and put that blanket down and have me get in bed and have a warm bed. So, we had coal, and that was all that stove burned. And then Mother, of course, had the wood-burning stove. And she made wonderful angel food cakes. And somehow, and I don't know how, but she would open the oven door, stick her elbow in. Yeah, that's about right. And she'd put her angel food cake in. And she'd have to keep the stove about that temperature, and she'd made beautiful angel food cakes. And anymore, you have to do it with automatic.
Do you remember, did you have special fixings for Christmas dinner?
No, not anything extra special, just what we had. Usually a roast chicken, because we always had the laying hens that we could go out and get. And then they had potatoes in the basement. You stored them in the basement. If we had raised sweet potatoes, he had a pile of sand in the basement, and you'd stick the sweet potatoes in the sand, and they would keep. But the other potatoes, you just put in a bin. And onions, they'd hang those up, and they would keep for quite a while. So any of those kinds of things that we had, we would have. One thing that Mother bought, she bought Jell-O. It was one of the groceries that she bought. And she made a lot of Jell-O salads, and we usually would have a Jell-O salad with our meal. Homemade jellies and jams, homemade bread, and then dessert was usually pie that she had made. So, and all the pie crust and everything was made with lard, because when you butchered, you got lard, and you cooked in it an inch thick. You'd fry those chickens in lard that was an inch thick, and they were good.
What about birthdays? You were by yourself, so did you have kids
Had
come in
parties.
for birthday parties?
Didn't have one every year. When I was 6, I had a party that quite a few of the neighbors came to, and I still have a bracelet. It was kind of a celluloid type bracelet, and I had 2 of them, a red one and a yellow one, and Blaine Barton gave them to me. They were neighbors. And that, I remember other things, but I remember those bracelets, and I still have one of them. And I had, didn't have very many parties, just 2 or 3. Really a bigger deal than birthdays was May Day. Mother would save cereal boxes, and she'd cut them down, so we'd have some oblong ones, and then oatmeal boxes for round, and on her sewing machine she would ruffle crepe paper and put that around those boxes and made handles with the crepe paper on them. And then on May Day she would make fudge to put in them and pop popcorn, and then I would pick violets to put in them. And what you were supposed to do was to deliver that May basket and then run to the car before whoever you left it for would run out and kiss you. And they were supposed to catch you and kiss you. Well, you didn't have to run too fast if you left one for the boys, because they weren't running too fast to catch you. But she made lots and lots of May baskets for me when I was little. And that was always a fun day. It's pretty well lost now. There's maybe a few, but now it's kind of a thing of the past. It was And then I liked Halloween because then we got to, we always had pumpkins. We raised them and always got to make jack-o'-lanterns. And I remember one year my parents had a Halloween party, and my dad dressed up as a ghost, and I just remember kind of that part of it. But I remember it was fun. A lot of people were there, neighbors and stuff. So,
Any other events or memories that come to mind after we've been talking?
for school, at school, one thing that was always fun, when you went to school, the first day, you got a list of everything you needed, the books you needed, and all that kind of stuff, and what size pencils. Well, they didn't have a lot of size pencils then, but what crayons and all that sort of thing. And then you came to Shenandoah with your list, and you went to Jay's, and up above, and they still have that on the west side, the cupboards up above, and the ladder like we have in here came from Jay's. And you'd give them your list of books, and what school you were from, and they would climb up the ladder, and they'd move along, be up on top of the ladder and move that ladder until they'd come to the cupboard door that had the books in it that you needed, and then they'd get those books for you. And so I don't know why, town kids wouldn't have done that, I don't think. It was just the country kids that had to come in and buy their books at Jay's. And I don't know how big an area they supplied books for, but we were in Fremont County, and I know we had to come to Jay's to get my books. And that was kind of fun. And then we all usually got to have some kind of an ice cream treat, because they had the wire table and chairs. I don't know how to describe it, they were just wire-like chairs. Mm-hmm. And back in the back, they had one or two tables, and they had a small one for little kids. And we usually get a treat when we came in. And we had a neighbor lady that did not drive, and she would have Mother bring her to town, and when she did, she would take us into Jay's, and it was the first building in town that was air-conditioned. And you go in there, it felt so good in the summertime, and you get your ice cream treat. And Squires was another place in town that we could get ice cream. That's where my dad would take me. We'd go into Squires and get an ice cream cone before we'd come home. So,
Well, covered quite a few things, so thank you very, very much. That was very good.